Hello and welcome to Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project, an initiative by the Bangladesh Feminist Archives. I'm Tanvir Anoy and I'm very much honored to host today's conversation. So this project is dedicated to preserving the voices of feminists who have shaped and continue to shape feminist and social justice movements in Bangladesh. Through these conversations, we aim to document their journeys, challenges, and contributions, and ensuring that their work is archived for future generations. Today's guest is someone whose work has consistently pushed boundaries and challenged dominant narratives across media, research, and grassroots organizing. We are honored to be joined by Sushmita Preetha, a feminist journalist, researcher, and movement strategist whose work spans over 15 years at the intersection of gender justice, labor rights, media accountability, and collective resistance. Sushmita is currently the Associate Coordinator at Nijera Kori, where she works directly with landless women's groups and grassroots organizers across the country, helping strengthening feminist popular education and collective mobilization efforts. Her role builds on long-standing commitments to labor justice, democratic practice, and community-rooted organizing. Previously, she served as the opiate editor at Daily Star, Bangladesh's largest English language newspaper, where she played a key role in shaping feminist editorial direction during a time of escalating political repression and shrinking space for dissent. Through her work, she brought critical attention to gender based violence, democracy, labor rights, and the silences surrounding the state power. Before this, she led editorial work at Star Weekend, served as impact editor, and helped rethink storytelling as a tool for accountability and social change. Beyond journalism, Shushmita has contributed to national and transnational labor justice initiatives, including research with the Worker Rights Consortium and projects examining the global garment supply chain, climate change impacts on labor, and the uneven burdens placed on women workers. She was a lead author for the UN Women Beijing Plus 30 position analysis on Bangladesh. Recently, she has also been involved in movement communication and visual political storytelling, designing posters, messaging, campaign, and digital communications in support of feminist, pro-worker, and anti-authoritarian organizing. Shushmita brings together lived experience, political clarity, and movement memory, and today we're here to listen to her story. So I will go with, Preetha, not Shushmita. But yeah, Preetha, let's begin with where your journey into feminist work started. What drew you into the feminist politics, and how did your early life studies or experiences shape your understanding of justice and equity?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the very generous introduction. And thank you for including me in this project. I don't know if I'm worthy of this, but thank you nevertheless. In terms of my journey, how it began, I don't remember a time when I was not a feminist, honestly, but I'll still give you a glimpse into my past life. So I was born into a very liberal family. Both of my parents were in the development sector. They used to both work for Proshika, which was one of the largest NGOs at the time. And I grew up at a time of great possibilities. Bangladesh had just transitioned into democracy. The NGO sector was booming, and organizations like Proshika weren't necessarily the same kind of NGOization process that we see today. It was a bit different back then.
I'm likely referring to as one of the largest NGOs at the time of Bangladesh's democracy transition.
Sorry, my Google. I don't. Sometimes technology is. Let me just switch off my phone. I'm so sorry. So anyway, so they were with Proshika at the time, and there was a lot of talk about social mobilization, feminism. How do you do grassroots organizing from a big organization like Proshika? So I think I grew up around that vocabulary, and my mother is also a feminist. She started the gender program at Proshika, and after that she worked at UNDP. She's worked in many different places, and I think she's been in I would like to think, an integral part of the women's movement in Bangladesh. So I think she played a very big role in who I eventually became. So shout out to my mom. Other than that, so when I went, so I had applied, but just finished my O levels, A levels. Everyone was applying at the time, so I thought Chitika said, let me also apply to a program that would fund me. So I ended up being accepted to a liberal arts college in upstate New York. It was called Hamilton College. It was a writing school essentially, but since it was a liberal arts college, I didn't really have to pick a what do you call it, a major at the time. So I took a lot of classes that I thought I would be interested in. Initially, I thought I would study economics, but I took a lot of classes in history, gender studies, anthropology, and so on. And I found myself really being drawn towards gender studies. I thought that was the way I saw the world. I thought it provided me with a framework for understanding how the world operates and how oppression operates. And my program was also very, socialist feminist. My advisor was a socialist feminist herself who used to work in the Philippines with peasant movements. So it really aligned with the kind of vision I had for the world, the way I wanted to critique the world, and the kind of resistance movements I wanted to be a part of. So that's why I then majored in women's studies. After that, I came back to Dhaka, and I wasn't completely sure what I wanted to do because I'd done during my time at Hamilton, I'd majored in gender studies, but I also double majored. We could essentially create a major of our own. So I created my own major. It was basically just courses I wanted to study. And so I ended up doing a critique of the development paradigm in Bangladesh. So we talked about how, resistance kind of has become de-radicalized within this structure, within this bureaucratic structure where we're answerable to the donor. So what does it mean when resistance has to be measured through log frames? What possibilities exist then? So after writing that critique, I felt like I couldn't come back and work in an NGO. I felt I couldn't work at the UN. I couldn't do any of these things. There was like a host of things that I felt I couldn't do because I would be selling out. When you're young, you have all of these like grand notions of things you want to do. So then Daily Star was looking, the Star Weekend magazine in particular was looking for a writer. They were looking for a feature writer. And I'd never thought of journalism, had not studied it. I'd never thought of myself as a writer. I did used to coach people about how to write when I was in college. I was a tutor at the writing school they had, but I never really thought of myself as a writer. But when I saw that ad, I was like, okay, this could be interesting. Like, it could be interesting to write about the things that I want to write about. I could be an anthropologist and a storyteller all at once. Could be fun. So I applied on a whim, really, and then I joined, and I guess the rest is history. I don't know. Then you see, journalism is its own kind of addiction. I think it was because of the kind of person I am, because it is very difficult for me to do just one thing day in and day out. Like it is very difficult for me to do a job, a 9-to-5 job, and doing the same thing over and over again. And in journalism, you were doing very many different things. You were pursuing a lot of different stories. It gave me an opportunity to explore many things that I was interested in. I could do labor, I could do women's rights, I could do culture, I could write about art, I could write about movies, But throughout all of that, what remained consistent in me was that I would bring a feminist lens to whatever I was writing about, right? Because I think that's the way I see the world, and that's the way I want to frame the world and analyze the world. So yeah, that's I guess how it all started.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to hear from you about your feminist consciousness, right? And we can go for the next question, right? So, how have your ideas about feminist work evolved across different spaces, journalism, research, grassroots organizing, and movement building?
Wow, that's a big question. I don't know, it feels like it should be a book. I think, I don't know if I can clearly answer that question, Mane, if I can answer that question how you want it, but I'll just talk about my chronic existential crisis. So I told you before that even after I graduated, I struggled to find a job. I was like, I don't want resistance or movement building work to become a 9 to 5 job. And for me to just like okay, I've done this many group sessions, I've done this many things. So it's been very important for me to not just do the work, but to also think about how I'm implicated in the processes itself, like how I'm implicated in structures of power and where I'm positioned. So I think I joined the Daily Star. It's a corporate media, so it might seem almost. I think I always had that. It always felt a bit of a contradiction for me that I was working in a corporate media, but talking about all of this work about social justice, about radicalism, about all of that, but within this very corporate structure. And it always sat very uneasily with me. But at the same time, I felt, and people often told me that it was very important to make these kind of spaces accountable, to make these kind of spaces more representational, and because it had so much power over influencing discourse, that it was important to somehow make a dent, to make a dent in that space, to bring in voices that would otherwise not be heard. So for a long time, I sat with that idea. I thought, okay, it was worthwhile to be able to do that, to be able to influence discourse at a national level and perhaps even at an international level. Yeah, but slowly that would, eat away at me. That at what cost was I doing that, and was I truly being able to tell the kind of stories I wanted to tell within the structures of a corporate media? So that's one thing. And then the question became, and I think one of the reasons I stayed in journalism for so long is because I didn't know what else I would do, right? Like if I didn't want to do all of the other work, if I didn't want to, and I don't believe in the kind of development paradigm where people sitting in Dhaka offices design interventions for the so-called poor to lift them out of poverty. And so many of our development programs, whether it's microcredit, whether these empowerment programs, don't really, in the end, they individualize the question of poverty instead of thinking of it as a structural problem. So we are not mounting a full-fledged critique of capitalism. We are not envisioning a radical transformation of the state, of the structures of power. We are in many ways simply just making it palatable for everyone. So I have a real problem in being a part of it. And then there's also the question of who am I to speak on behalf of anyone, right? Like I come from a relatively privileged background in Bangladesh, having access to English, having, being able to speak this language, being able to talk to donors and all of that. Who am I really to represent the landless in a conference sitting in Bangkok, for instance? I find it really difficult to sit with those contradictions. So I'm always in a state of constant existential crisis about what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of this work? Should I just give up? Should I just go into a cave and so on? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just how my mind works.
Thank you. So my next question is for you is that you led editorial work during a time of rising repression and shrinking democratic space in Bangladesh. So what did you mean to hold space for feminists, dissenting, and marginalized voices under these conditions?
Wow, the past 15 years, it's almost like a distant memory almost. But so when I joined the media, so things weren't so bad, right? Because the Awami League had just come into power, things were okay. We were reporting on things. After Star Weekend magazine, I went into reporting. Shahbag happened then. I was just a young reporter reporting on Shahbag, and I saw how that played out, and I saw how that played out. Then Rana Plaza happened, Tazreen happened. So all of those had a real impact on me, and had a real impact on the kind of work I would want to do and in the future. But after that, so I went and did my master's then at U of T, and then came back and started working again at Daily Star in the editorial section. And after that, I took over Star Weekend magazine, and after that, I was the op-ed editor. So there were progressions of my work and my editorial leadership, but also by the time I was heading the editorial section, repression was at its worst, right? There was one thing was that there were lots of things we couldn't say, and so it was really difficult to have to constantly censor ourselves, and all of this. I think even more than the censorship itself, it was the self-censorship that was really difficult. And then the second bit was that we weren't always censored. We could sometimes, and oftentimes we said what we wanted to say, but who was really listening? Because by that time, the institutions were so above accountability that whatever we said, I felt like I was writing the same editorial over and over again, but no one was really listening. So there's that. But in terms of repression, in terms of how much we could and couldn't say, it was definitely challenging. It was definitely challenging having to censor ourselves all the time. I think there are some things that we absolutely could not talk about, of course. We could not really name Sheikh Hasina. We could not talk about militarization. We talked about crossfires, disappearances, and so on. But I think from a more detached angle, I mean, we talked about human rights and all of that. But again, we couldn't necessarily name all of the people that we would have wanted to. But I think still for a long time, and I think people don't give the Daily Star enough credit anymore, that we did still find a way to report on things that were happening. Maybe we had to be strategic. Maybe we couldn't say out loud a lot of the things. So it was a constant negotiation with the editor, with I don't know, other stakeholders, business stakeholders, about what we could and couldn't do. So that was life under repression. But I think towards the end of it, I felt that I had become a zombie, that I was just writing things, that I was just like editing things out and writing things. And what was the point of writing anymore? The same things over and over again, if we couldn't really say what needed to be said. You know what I mean? We were saying something, but I felt it wasn't enough. And so it was a deep kind of like, I fell into a sort of like real depression, thinking, Jay, this point is worthless at the time. But going back to your question about what did it feel to hold space for women and other marginalized voices, that bit I think was important. I think that bit made a lot of, I don't know if it made a difference, but it made a lot of difference to me to be able to do that, because all institutions in Bangladesh are patriarchal, but the media in particular is more patriarchal than any that I have worked in or that I have inhabited. I was lucky that Mahfouz Bhai himself has always he calls himself a feminist. I think he's a feminist. He's been a big champion, and I think is one of the reasons I stayed there for so long. But the institution in itself and the way it operates, and sort of like the broship, especially in the newsroom, is something that is very difficult to penetrate. And I am a loud person. I can talk and make space for myself in places, but I think for a lot of young girls, a lot of young people who come from marginalized backgrounds, it is very difficult to find their space there. to find mentorship there, to insist that these are the kinds of stories I want to tell. I think it's very difficult. So being able to work with some of those people, being able to mentor them, being able to hear their stories, being able to bring their stories into the pages, was something that I really liked doing. And the other thing was that I felt that, when I joined, women's issues were like dismissive, like women's issues, women's issues. The women we'll send a woman and they'll do a women issue. And what the hell is a women's issue? Like everything is a women's issue. We're talking about the economy, it's a women's issue. We're talking about democracy, it's a women's issue. Like what does that even mean? So that very narrow way of looking at gender and human rights, I mean, that needed to shift. And I think in the 10 or 15 years that I stayed in the Daily Star, some of it has changed, or at least because I was in a leadership position in some of the departments, I could insist that it needed to be this or nothing. Not to say that institutional culture has changed a lot. I think it changed to some extent because it had to. But I thought by and large, I think maybe not. Maybe not. It's very difficult. And because corporate media is at the end of the day beholden to advertisers, it's beholden to revenue, right? There is a limit to how much radical work you can do. How much can you talk about Islamization? How much could I talk about queer issues? How much could I talk about militarization in the CHT? I could, but only from a very safe, sort of like a safe place. So that was also, I think, a cause of mounting frustration for me, that after, we can talk about violence against women, we can talk about all of these stuff about access and stuff, but if I can't talk about women's sexuality, if I can't talk about, militarization, if I can't talk about queer issues, if I can't talk about security forces and so on, then then there's a lot of things that I can't talk about. And is it then worthwhile to do so?
Thank you. And I do have a question for you. You can answer to that if you want. You don't have to, right? Because it just came to my mind because I when I was growing up, my English was really bad, and I mean, like, I didn't have any fascination with English. So, like Daily Star or Strike Weekend, these two were, one of the life changing experiences for me to to shape my reading in English, because I come from Bangla medium and I never paid attention to English. It's not that, Bangla medium people cannot read English, or they're good in English. It's more like I didn't have any interest in that. So when Star Weekend got shut down, it really made a really big impact on me, because I think I always thought that, like, in media houses, Bangla, English, whatever you say, Star Weekend always played a really different role. I think at least they have diverse voices there, and I know for a fact that, like, you used to be the editor of that, so I know where the agenda was coming from. Um, do you think, like, Star Weekend shut down just also for the government pressure as well, or like it wasn't sustainable in that particular
No,
environment?
that was not the government. I think it had to do with, as I said, I mean, at the end of the day, it's corporate media. And so it was always it was always about costs. Okay, we need to cut costs. Is it worth it? Like, how are we going to pay people? And, unfortunately, there is a hierarchy in the news organization where news is the most important, or perhaps the business section. Actually, to be very honest, even these days, news is not the most important thing. It's the business section. That's the commercial section that's the most important, because they're bringing in the money. And we were often reminded that, listen, if these sections don't exist, we are not getting paid. So, we have to pay our due respect to these things. So there were always, I think from the beginning of Star Weekend, there was always the question of, oh, it doesn't bring ads, it doesn't bring the ads, it's not paying the money. So why should we spend so much time, so much money on this project? And I think Mahfouz Bhai himself also, like, when it switched from the magazine to the tabloid, because it was costing a lot of money for the Daily Star, like it was subsidizing the publication process. So in the end, I think he was convinced that it needed to shift to a tabloid. And by then, the shift from the magazine to the tabloid was in its for me was a big letdown because it's what I have grown up with. I had also grown up with reading the magazine. It was the most it was it played a really formative role in my in when I was growing up as well. So when I had actually left the Daily Star. I was working at the Workers' Rights Consortium at the time because I'm also interested in labor and labor rights. I was doing labor investigations at the time. And Marcus B called and he said, Preetha, I want you to take over the Star Weekend magazine. You can do this on the side. You can just come in whenever you just do it. And I was like, oh my God, that would be amazing because, I worked at the magazine. This was such a big deal. And there are so many things I could do. And I think back then, I think Eli Tapu was looking after it before me, and Eli Tapu had a different vision of Star Magazine. And by then, I think they had tried to make it a bit more light, I don't know, to make it more approachable, accessible to people, and perhaps to also bring in ads, because that was the feedback that Star Weekend Magazine was getting, is that, advertisers are interested, as if that's the only thing that really matters. So when I took over, I was like, I can do the kind of like light, I think maybe the revenue section would have wanted it to be like a light kind of like weekend magazine where people were coming like feel good stuff. And I don't do feel good journalism. I feel terrible about the state of the world. Like, you give me a thing, you give me a good thing, I'll tell you like 5 things that are problematic about it. So I was like, I can do the kind of feel good journalism. And even from apart from Mahfouz Bhai, even I think Ashfaq Bhai at the time, he was like, Preetha, you will take over the magazine, like you do serious stuff. And I was like, yeah, but like we can do serious stuff from the pages of a magazine. And I felt that Star Weekend magazine always did that and could do that. And so I did investigations. I think our team did a lot of long form investigations that the newspaper didn't do. I think we did a lot of very critical analysis of culture, art, of current politics, and so on. And I did it with a very young team. And I was so proud of the work they did. I was so happy with the work that we were doing. And honestly, that was probably the best years of my like
I
working
don't want
career.
to sound like a snarky or elite person, but I I sometimes don't touch the main, I would say, paper. I would just straight away go to Star Magazine or like the tablet one, right?
Yeah,
Like it was so
yeah.
fascinating for me because I think as also a queer person growing up in a society where like your voice is not there, so it was very important for me, like not just queer issue, but it's more like a more intersectional issue. I think I always felt that way. It's like it's a very different voice coming from like a very different type of like media
Yeah, because
house,
news,
right?
my problem with the news is that news sees things in black and white and it sees
True.
things in short sentences in like 500 words. I like nuance. I like context. Yeah, sure, this thing happened. Sure, that's the news. That makes the headlines. But I am not interested in just that. I'm interested in why it happened. What are the sets of things that led to this moment, and what does it imply about the future, you know? So I am interested in long form. I have always been interested in long form journalism. And I felt that throughout my time at the Daily Star, I really tried to get people to understand that you're getting it wrong. You're getting it wrong. People don't want BuzzFeed. People want long form, serious long form journalism. So you need to invest in this. You can be thinking about the advertisers all of the time. You have different supplements that are bringing you money. This one, you do it because you care about the issue. You do it for the journalism. You do it to tell the kind of stories we want to tell. And so Star Weekend ended because I said I didn't want to do this anymore. And the reason I said I didn't want to do it anymore was because by the time my reporters, my editors were working, they were giving their best, they were doing some of their best work. But when it came time to their salary increases, when it came time for their promotions, when it came time for them to get on the wage board, the reaction from the office was always, oh, we can't do it, we don't have the money for it, you're not bringing in enough money. If they move to the news section, they'll get paid more. And I was like, I wanted to expand. At the time, I wanted to expand the work. I thought we were doing important work, and I thought that we couldn't do it from the limits of like the 16 pages. I wanted it to become a digital platform. I wanted more investment, and I even had a whole plan where I was like, okay, fine, you can't bring in the money, I'll bring in the money. But anyways, I won't go into the details of what happened to that project. So
But that's a really big loss. I think that day it got shut
yeah.
down. I really mourned personally because um, I remember the first time my piece was published in Star Weekend. I think you didn't know me personally, but then again, I when I saw that in print in 2000 back in 2017, I cannot express you in like words how felt I how good I felt, and I think that piece was on bullying, school bullying, about like me being called like your derogatory terms like hijra, half ladies, like the school bullying, and for my own like appearance and everything. And I think that is the one of the first times, and I'm not going to like to exaggerate and say like I'm the pioneer of that, but I think that particular time a lot of folks around me saying that like we don't see pieces about school bullying and particularly gender expression, right? And I really wanted to make this situation to like to thank you personally to like to pick up that space, and really thankful to that that particular piece really worked a lot, because I there are a lot of bullies of mine in his school. They kind of reach out to me, and they some of them apologized, and some of them like I'm just making this as an issue which was like like a fun or something, right? There's like a polarizing view both of sides. And I remember I also wrote like a response piece of that about my hair, particularly surrounding my hair, that also got published in December. I cannot tell you in words like how those feelings like created. I remember like buying multiple versions on multiple pieces of the newspaper, like sharing with my mother, sharing with my school teachers, professors, and staff as well. And I remember that one of the UTAs of my university that time, East West University, they kind of like got so surprised that like I got published in Daily Star, and that kind of made it like, oh, okay, fine. And then later they kind of flagged me one of my essay as like plagiarism, and my teacher defended it, like his work has been published in Daily Star. I know his work, so you cannot flag his work as a plagiarism. Like the UTA got very surprised of that as well. I hope that UTA is watching this video, because that was a really bad experience for me, because like just because of like I'm not saying my English is really great, but I kind of write in a certain English which is very more politicized, right? Or like maybe very like angry ranting type, right? So yeah. So sorry, we kind of like
No,
derived
no,
from
it's
our
okay. I'm actually very happy to talk about it. I think because it has like deep trauma in me, that
yeah.
that period of Star Weekend
Yeah.
and having let go and not being ever able to go
Yeah.
back to that
No,
space.
but then again,
Yeah,
you should be also proud of yourself that like you also
thank you,
impacted
thank you,
and impacted
thank you.
in one of the queer person's life who's been not represented in the mainstream media, right? Right now,
It means so much to me. You don't know. I'm feeling emotional just thinking about it.
please do feel emotional, but because of like
I'm so
I'm
glad.
taking these interviews, feels like I should give you the respect you deserve, right? So
Thank you so much.
that's your respect.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
I think
I
that's
will.
also one of the reasons I stayed in journalism for so long, being able to create that kind of space for people. And because people did reach out to me and did say that it made a big difference to them.
Yeah, that's
Um,
why I'm saying. Like, I mourned the day Star Weekend closed, because I think that was a really sad day of, like, I would say in general in intellectualism. I would say intersectional intellectualism, because I think
no, I think
because of like I think a lot of things produced, like Prothom produced a lot of like pseudo intellectualism and like very like up to the mark. I don't like their content. I'm sorry to say that, but I think Star Weekend always made that make sure, because you also there. I think Apurva also part of the team at some point, right?
I
Like
had a great team. Like I had a great team.
yeah,
I had Okubo with me, I had Zaima with me, I had
uh,
Maliha with me, I had Nilima with
yeah,
me, Chandon. I mean, it was just Abida.
yeah.
It was just such an amazing
Yeah, yeah.
team.
I think the
projects for
team also
ideas
may, yeah, I think a team can
makes a
also
big
make a really
difference.
big, yeah, I think a team also can make a very big difference, right? To like to how those voices can be heard, right? And I think and that's what I'm saying. Like I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying like I mourned that day because I think a part of me saying that like okay, fine. So who will carry that, in future? And sadly, it there's no
Indeed.
alternative I have seen of like Star Weekend. I sometimes I think Netra News are they are doing pretty good job, like bringing out diverse outside voices. I have seen also your work there as well. I hope that like but then again that whole Star Weekend phenomena, I miss that. I absolutely miss that. I think there was a particular time of myself and I like when I was, did my undergrad in English literature, I thought like after my undergrad literature, I would like, go to the field and do that. But then again, life turned into a different thing and I'm in a different route. But
It is.
still, I feel that like I still mourn for Star Weekend. And I don't think like I mourn for Star Weekend as a institution. I think I mourn for the version or a version you created through Star Weekend. That's something
Thank you. Thank you.
I
Thank you so
do
much.
mean.
I think
Yeah.
I'm one for that as well. But
No.
maybe someday
I okay, maybe someday.
we have
Okay.
something
I will
like
go
that.
back. I will go back and put my interview hat
Huh.
and I will ask you the next
Go
question.
back to the more serious questions. All right, let's go.
Let's go. Yes. So you have
Huh.
worked with landless women through Nijera Kori, garment workers, through Workers' Rights Consortium, and in research that connects Bangladesh to global supply chains. What has
Mhm.
this work taught you about the relationship between feminist politics and labor justice?
See, my thing is that my understanding of feminism begins from a very simple premise, right? That any feminism that neglects class cannot actually begin to address the complexities and multidimensionalities of oppression under capitalism. So that's my framework for understanding the world and for anything I do. So in Bangladesh, as in elsewhere in the world, gender depression is obviously inseparable from the political economy of labor and land. So if we speak of women's empowerment, for instance, without confronting issues such as dispossession, debt, wage extraction, exploitation of labor, I fear that we end up reproducing the very hierarchies that feminism claims to resist. So that has been my biggest, I think, that's always been what I wanted to confront, that my work, whatever work I did, would in the way have within it a critique of capitalism. I think working with Nijera Kori's landless women, whether it's working with landless women at Nijera Kori or garment workers through the Workers' Rights Consortium, and later when I did a lot of research work around that, I think what it what it revealed is that whether it's rural poverty or industrial poverty, they're linked sites within a global regime of accumulation, right? So the landless women in Paigata and the factory worker in Savar may inhabit different geographies of the same system that requires women's labor to remain cheap, disciplined, and replaceable. And I find that mainstream gender policy often translates feminism into questions of access. So access to microcredit, to employment, to representation. But these forms of inclusion, unfortunately, frequently mask the redistribution problem. They integrate women into exploitative circuits without altering the structure of exploitation itself, right? Um, but in contrast, like a class-conscious feminism would situate patriarchy within capitalist relations of production rather than within liberal rights frameworks. And when one of my peeves, I mean, I don't know what the word is, one of my sadness with how movements have played out in Bangladesh is that we tend to think of the labor movement and the women's movement as separate movements, and it doesn't make sense how they can be. Because if you think about labor, whether you think about the garment industry, where as of recently now the number has decreased, but for a long time, it was like over 80% of the workers were women. So essentially, it's a women's problem, right? Like it's a feminist issue. Like workers' issue is a feminist issue. So how is it that the women's movement went this direction and the worker movement went this direction, as if the two aren't always integrally connected? So that's one. And the other thing is that when we're talking about rural women also are workers, they're farmers, they're agricultural workers, and there is that whole economy of care work that needs to be talked about, because these are unpaid, essentially unpaid work for which we are being exploited across classes, of course, but more so when you're at the rural level, because you're doing agricultural work, you're working from the morning till night, and your work is not being counted anywhere. You're not being counted as a farmer, you're not being counted in the GDP for your care work, etc., etc. So how are we articulating these women? Are these workers? Are we uniting them as workers? Like, what are we doing? What a lot of NGOs have done is they reduce these grassroots women into beneficiaries of services, into beneficiaries of microcredit, into like, we give them things, we teach them how to do things, we build their capacity to do things. But they already know how to do a lot of things. They already know internally what a lot of their issues are. So how are we organizing these people? If we're not organizing them collectively, if we're not listening to them, if we're not allowing them to set the agenda, if we're simply designing interventions from these air-conditioned offices in Dhaka, then I don't know what kind of class politics, what kind of feminist politics we're really pursuing. So I've even forgotten the question that you asked now.
Do you want me to
Sorry.
repeat that again?
No, but have I answered your question? Like
Yeah,
what?
sort of, yes. But if you want to like to add more, like I asked, like what has this work taught you about the relationship between feminist politics and labor justice? Yeah.
Okay,
That
so yeah, as I was saying, I think this is one and the same. For me, they remain the same. I think there is no version of feminism that doesn't include or that doesn't prioritize labor and class and its analysis, in short.
Thank you so much. I always appreciate your answers. My next question is for you is that how do global systems of capitalism, development, and climate crisis show up in the everyday realities of working class women in Bangladesh?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. But as I kind of already hinted
Yeah,
at,
you
like,
already kind of
yeah,
like put
yeah, yeah.
put it
I've
out.
already talked a little bit about it, but I think women, especially working class women, are the most oppressed under capitalism. And I think we are yet to articulate a politics, a liberatory politics that talks about this, that really addresses the larger issues and the way that women are implicated and exploited within these systems, within these interlocking systems. So whether we're talking about climate change, even if we're talking about climate change, so let's talk about climate change. Women are, of course, one of the most affected, the worst affected, as we know. We know that whenever any kind of disasters happen, it's women who have to not just fend for themselves, but for their families, for the communities. They take on the double burdens. They do all of it, and their voices are the least heard in any kind of policy making spaces, in any kind of decision making, even within our activist circles. Grassroots women, working class women, where are their voices? Who's speaking for them? I'm speaking for them. Who am I to speak for them? It's absolutely crazy that even within our circles, there is so much exclusion about who gets to set the agenda, who prioritizes what. So whether it's climate change, whether it's worker rights, whether it's development, whatever interventions we are designing at the end is already always flawed, because we are doing it from a place of privilege, one, and two, without really wanting or without really trying to dismantle the very systems that have caused the problems in the first place. So if you look at climate change, if you look at, for instance, now we have so many green factories in Bangladesh. Huh? And this to me, it just feels like it's like a cosmetic thing. Like we're putting on makeup and saying, "Oh, look at us, we're so green. We are, we care about the environment. We care about our workers." But if you go to those factories, if you talk to the workers, you'll see that these workers are being paid like, meager wages. And every time we know what happens whenever workers ask for the wages, they're beaten, they're shot. They're fired, they're blacklisted. I mean, it's the same circle over and over. And every time they increase the wage, what they do is they increase the production pressure. So if workers used to produce 50 pieces before, now they have to produce 100. Huh? And it keeps on increasing. So for like 8 hours, and in most cases it's 12 hours, if not more, with overtime. And even though technically they're supposed to be able to say, I don't want to do overtime, but most people, one, they don't because they need the money, and two, because saying no is not really an option in a garment factory. So they're working these like 14-hour shifts day in and day out in very hot, very dusty environments. And so what does it mean to have a green factory with like that looks nice and has a lot of plants? It's a bit of a joke. So I feel like all of these terminologies we create about green factories and compliant factories is just to make capitalism more amenable to the consumer, so the consumer can feel less guilty about buying from Zara or buying from H&M or buying from wherever, Primark, or wherever they're buying from. It's just a story we tell ourselves. So that's one. And even if we look at climate adaptation, so now Bangladesh is painted as like this huge victim of climate change. And of course we are, but like this disaster scenario and all of these adaptation programs being designed, are they being designed with any real input from the people who are being most affected? No. Where is it coming from? It's coming from the top. It's coming from the World Bank, IMF. It's coming from, adaptation programs and experts, technical experts at the national and international level. So again, not really sure to what extent we're really addressing climate change. We're really not. We're just going through. I oftentimes feel that we're just going through these motions and just trying to make ourselves feel better that we're doing something to change the world, where we're simply a part of the problem. So I honestly feel that all of these technical interventions that we're designing to change the world is not the way to change the world. And I think people are frustrated, and that's why we're seeing the rise of the right in many parts of the world, because whatever promises capitalism had, that it would deliver this, it would deliver that, it would deliver jobs, it would the trickle down economics, it's not working. So working class people around the world are dissatisfied, and because there is no left liberal politics that really gets to the bottom of it anymore, they're not providing a transformative vision of the world. I think that's why people are looking to the right, because the right is at least giving them something, giving them a vision, giving them a different alternative. Again, I've lost sight of the question, but there you go.
No, you're absolutely on track. So I think that kind of like paved the way to to ask me to you to the next question is that, so what does then accountability mean in this context, both locally and globally? I think you kind of like answered a little bit, but if you want to expand on that.
I think the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to be honest with ourselves about what we're doing, right? And I'm not saying that all of these, first of all, I don't want to suggest that there's a like right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. Usually it's we inhabit there's really complex places. We're trying to negotiate right and wrong. Like we're trying to, from our own vantage points, we're trying to do the best we can. And oftentimes we realize that, okay, no, in the end, our efforts have been co-opted, that, whatever results we wanted, we're not getting that. I think we inhabit this messy place. So I'm not going to say that we're not all bad people. Many of us, most of us who are in the work of activism, we're coming from a good place. We want to do something. We want to do something. But I think now is a good time for left liberal activists to really think about what we're doing, how we're doing, and is this really how we want to do it for the rest of our lives? Because one, I think activism cannot be a 9 to 5 job. Two, I think activism cannot be like counted in log frames and donor-driven proposal formats. Um, and three, I think it really needs to be less fragmented. Like our movements are really fragmented. And I think we really need to be cognizant of who is making decisions, who is calling the shots, who is designing the interventions. And even though we say that our development is participatory, it's like bottom up. And if you really deep dive, you will see that those spaces are very few and far between. We still have not figured out how to talk to workers, to talk to the grassroots people, to allow them to set the agenda. Because if at the end of the day, if it's middle class, upper class women setting the agenda of the feminist movement, I don't know. I feel like that exclusion needs to be addressed, needs to be talked about. So I think that is one. And two, I think we need to now seriously think about what our collective politics is going to be. I think we need, back in the 60s, at least 60s, 70s, there was communism, there was anarchism, there were all of these isms that we talked about. But in the days since, with capitalism at its height, and all of the post-structuralist and postmodern, okay, there is no grand narrative and there is no one story. There is no grand narrative and there is no one story, but I also think that oppressed people around the world need to come together. There needs to be some uniting ideology of sorts where we say, whether it's a politics of care, whether it's a politics of love, whatever it is, we need to come up with some transformative politics that can actually address people's increasing frustrations with the status quo. And increasingly, I'm thinking that the answer lies in building community. Hence, I've actually come back to the grassroots. I think I've done enough of the work at the policy level of talking to policymakers. I don't want to talk to them anymore. I just don't care. I don't think they're listening, and two, I just don't have the energy to make them listen. So I now want to listen to what people on the ground are saying, and I think the left in particular is too detached from the people, from the voices of the people, from what people want. Like we can say all of the grand theories about imperialism and decolonization and whatnot, but if we're not being able to talk to the workers, if we're not being able to talk to the farmers, the women farmers in particular, then what's the point? What's even the point? And we're seeing that the left is not just in Bangladesh, across the world, the left is not being able to connect. So I think we really need to do our politics differently. I think it's really time we understand that liberal politics will only take us so far, and it has not taken us where we wanted to go. I think for the longest time, we thought that working within the system would help. Like we could change the system by working within, that's why I worked at the Daily Star. That's why I worked here, there, everywhere. And at the end of the day, you ain't gonna change the system from working within. You gotta break that shit down. And at this point, I'm all about breaking shit down.
No, that's really interesting because I was about to say that with your reference point is that like left has become such, all the time it's more likely they're in a academic conference and they're just like reading out a academic paper, right? Like they have become such a, very pseudo intellectual at some point. So they have kind of like forgot how to like to talk to like a farmer, right? How to talk to with a like a general person, right? Like they kind of like forgot the language. It always happens whenever you just consume yourself too much with like, theoretical work, and also you do not go to field work, right? Because there's a lot of distinction between like field activist and versus like, academic activists, right? So I think theorists and field workers, they have this, kind of differences. I'm not going to go to this particular debate that much long, but that is something, one criticism I always hear, that like left left cannot have that, don't have that language to like to talk to regular people. That's
One
why.
is the language, one is the language, and two, you need to have networks and you need to have like you need to build community. You need to put in the work. Like you can't just be giving speeches from Dhaka and people will like you need to go to the field. You need to build your constituency. I mean, constituency is perhaps not the right word, but if you're a leftist party, then yes, like you need to have people on the ground who will support you, who understand. You need to give them and you need to have a politics that they can get behind, like a politics they understand, yes, so language, but also like institutional structure. Like you need to be able to garner support at the grassroots level. Otherwise, I mean, who's gonna come and vote for any of our leftist parties, you know? As opposed to you look at Jamaat and the way they're organizing on the ground, they have a clear politics, they're talking about social justice, you know, whatever they may stand for, but at the field level, they're talking about social justice. They're listening to people. They're going into spaces. They're asking them, what do you need? I'll give you that. And they're actually giving them that. So you can't blame the people for then trusting Jamaat more than they would trust any other left party. It's only natural. So we
And we
need
have,
to.
yeah, and we have seen the kind of results we kind of got it from the universities, right? Like the university student union elections, right? Like people are saying like, oh, what happened? But then again, if you do grassroots organizing, you win, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
unfortunately, it's the right doing the grassroots organizing, and the left is just like, হা হুতাশ করে টাইম কাটাচ্ছে আমি মানে me
yeah,
included, so কি আর বলবো?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of like we are so consumed by theoretical fight that sometimes we forget that like we have to go, and do the grassroots stuff, right?
Mhm.
Okay, moving to our next question. So you moved across journalism, research, field investigations, campaign building, and now movement communication and visual political storytelling. So how do you see storytelling as analysis, as testimony, as narrative, functioning as resistance?
I see it as all of those things. I think telling stories is the first thing we can do because women, especially grassroots women and other marginalized, I don't even like using the word marginalized. I guess historically excluded communities, they have been erased from the archive, right? They're erased from mainstream media, they're erased from the discourse. So my primary goal, or my primary task when I was in media, and even now, is how do we bring those voices into the center? Like, how do we bring those voices from the margins to the center? And how do we make those stories the focal point of whatever policies or interventions or resistance we design? So one, I think storytelling is important because without the kind of nuanced storytelling that we want, we're not really understanding how the world operates. I think we have a very skewed understanding of the world. If we are erasing the point of view of half the population, and if you consider the working class, then the overwhelming majority of the population are absolutely nowhere in the discourse, or they're in very small ways or in ways that are mediated through a very elite lens. So I think in the very fact of being able to tell their stories, of people being able to hear their stories in itself a radical act. But beyond that, I want to also think about, okay, storytelling as the first and a very primary goal. But beyond that, what do we do with the stories, right? Like, are we just recording the stories for recording's sake, or are we learning from the stories? Are we letting it set the agenda? So I think that's also for me the next step, is that yes, we tell their stories, and it's very important, particularly now that I'm at Nijera Kori, a lot of my focus is on how do I archive the landless struggle? How do I archive their stories of resistance? Because now it would seem like our story of the women's movement, or feminist movement, is simply a story of the who's who of Bangladesh's like elite feminist. And this is not to discount their contribution. They've really done a lot, and they've really changed Bangladesh in ways that I'm forever grateful to them. But unfortunately, yes, their stories are also not recorded as much as it needs to. But the women at the grassroots, they're completely invisible. Like you would not be able to name even one person. You cannot, and that's not your fault. It's how we record our stories. It's who we think is important. It's who we think is worth naming in our reports. So and Nijera Kori, we make it a point to not like one name Nijera Kori in the land in the programs that landless organizations they do. It's only their name that goes there. But even in other programs, like I've seen that if there is no big name, newspapers are always like, okay, who's organizing this? Who's the big name? Who's as if like if there is no big name, there is no point to anything, as if a grassroots organizer cannot have that kind of importance, as if decentralized leadership is not a thing. During the Moitri Jatra, it was so interesting, but also so like frustrating for me to see how people really need like a one figure, like a central figure, like a hero, to like as if like decentralized, like we've still not been able to really think about decentralized leadership, to not have like a cult based, personality based leadership. And I really don't like being in the forefront of things. I would rather be like somewhere in the back. So that's also something I want to be able to cultivate. But yeah, so storytelling, your question was about storytelling again. I don't know where I went. Yeah, so
No,
I think it's
thank you
very
so
important.
much.
And
Thank you
I
so much.
think,
That was a really great answer. Yeah, no.
but I think now more than ever, I really do feel the need that in the public discourse, it's so male, it's so cis male, it's like it's nauseating for me. Like I barely read the news anymore. I barely go on social media. I'm very absent on social media. Um, but I really do think there needs to be a feminist space, a feminist platform where we are telling the stories we want to hear, because I'm tired of men telling me what I need to hear. I'm tired of men making sense of the world. I don't need to listen to them. I don't care what they think about the July Charter. Like, go fuck yourself. Sorry.
মাফ করেন।
Censor that bit. But I'm tired of it. So I do think we need to create our own spaces, and we can't be waiting for anybody else to do it. We need to do that ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And that's how, like, the creation of Bangladesh Feminist Archives also happened. That, like, it kind of came with that notion that, like, oh my God, like, there's so many amazing feminists out there, but where their work being archived? Like, I knew myself, and I had to, like, to juggle with a lot of, like, from fragments from here to there. Like, there's nothing I could have, like, able to, like, to like read or like educate myself. So it also, like, I think the work you are doing right now is so amazing, and always collectively what we are doing right now, we have to, like, to make sure that, like, our voices are being, because nobody else would care to, like, to archive our voice.
Yeah,
We have
no,
to
no,
do
I
that.
really appreciate the work you're doing with the Bangladesh Feminist Archives. And I know you started off with the archiving project, but even the work you're doing as a news aggregator, I think it's still very important, because I know a lot of people come to tell you, like, I follow that. I also follow that, like, because everything is lost, and it's all of the flurry of like drama every time. I think women's issues always take a backseat. And it's good that Bangladesh Feminist Archives brings that to the
Yeah.
forefront. And
And also, thank you so much for saying that, because I don't think, like, you have said it in, like, this tone. Like, my tone is that, like, I always see that, like, media is a really male chauvinist, I would say, tool in Bangladesh, particularly whenever, even though, like, there's like, a news is being, written or, like, published, it's very in a very male gaze, right? And it just eliminates a lot of sensitivity and also a feminist, like, I would say, lens as well. So in Bangladesh Feminist Archives, the one thing we try to, like, to make sure that, like, we are not going to, like, to submit ourselves to the male case or the male, chauvinism, and the way they kind of use languages, and, like, you are also discriminate and also dehumanizes the, intersectional feminist issues as well. Okay, enough of us. My next question is for you, is that how do you navigate grief, anger, and responsibility in work that is so deeply tied to violence and harm?
okay, I'm just crazy. Okay, I mean, একদম পাগল হয়ে গেছি. So I don't know how I navigate it. I'm just like বদ্ধ পাগল. No, I think I really struggle with it. As I said, Jen, প্রথমে যেটা বললাম যে I have like I'm always filled with very much a lot of existential angst, like to inhabit a space in this world, to know about all of the injustices and to still like go on with life, to buy things, to participate in capitalism. I feel like the hypocrisy. Um, I have to sit and live with that hypocrisy every day. You know what I mean? Like I've seen Rana Plaza. I've seen like dead bodies, not dead bodies, not even dead yet, like almost dead bodies being taken out. I can still smell the rotten flesh. And yeah, so um having seen all of those, to somehow still go on with life as if it just is, you know, to go still buy things from Zara and whatever. And I can't pretend that I exist outside of it. Unfortunately, I'm very much a consumerist in this capitalist world. So one, I think about that a lot, and I think about what my purpose is in life, and if what I'm doing is at the end of the day harming people more, or you know, or actually helping people. And sometimes I even wonder, like, am I being narcissistic in thinking so much about myself? Like, oh, am I helping people? Who am I to help people? Like, you know, like the world will go on whether I exist or not. So I always go through these like internal dilemmas in my head, like um so yeah, so that leads me to actually, yeah. And I was very, very burnt out, you know. I was so burnt out. I last October, actually, it's been a year. Last October I left the Daily Star. I'd been very unhappy for a long time, for reasons that I've already talked about. I had wanted to go on a sabbatical in July when the July uprising happened. And so obviously that was an exciting moment because that felt like, oh my God, change is coming. Something good is going to happen. At least something's happening. So as a journalist and I felt alive, like as an activist, I felt alive. But so soon, I mean, even as the movement was folding, there were questions that were coming to my head. But very soon afterwards, one began to realize like the kind of transformative politics, the kind of class-based transformative politics that I would want to see in a quote unquote Bangladesh 2.0. Ain't nobody thinking about that. And there was no space for us to really talk about. So I really felt like I was crashing. Like I felt that I felt deeply, deeply depressed. And it was one thing living under, because I had lived under Sheikh Hasina's rule, and I think I had become very, very depressed at that time, thinking that it didn't matter what we said, it didn't matter what we did, and that and that we accepted authoritarian rule for 15 years was in a way like I found it very difficult to sit with it. I felt that I was complicit in it, right? Like because we allowed it to go on. I don't know. But post uprising, I was like, wait, even change, like if this is what change means, if this is what the next step is, then I don't know where I am. I don't know where I fit in. I don't know where I believe in. I don't know where my allies are. I don't know how to carry on this fight. And I also realized that we were saying all of these things. Okay, now media is free. We can talk about all of these things. And I realized we could not. We could not talk about all of those things. We could not talk about Islamization. We can not talk about feminists. We can't talk about queer issues. To badi dilam. We can't talk about militarization. We can't talk about the CHT. You can't talk about the key bale July heroes and whatnot without being termed Awami Leaguer Doshor. And I'm like, these people, I don't even know what they were doing during the Awami League regime. Anyways, but now all of a sudden they are all of these heroes, and now they have all of the power to tag us and whatever. So I was like, this terrain, I don't know if I
Can
can
I
handle
add
this.
something with you? It
Uh,
really, really, really angers me because of like as an intersectional feminist, we both
mm,
are. I have my own struggles, you have your own struggles. We always been like, like vocal about our issues. I really do not like buy this whole situation whenever a person come to me and say like, oh, 15 বছর কি করছেন? আরে ভাই, 15 বছর ধরে তো আমরা কথা বলেই গেছি।
করছি, পড়ে দেখো কি করছি। I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I
there.
mean, like what you have done. You folks
What have
have
you
like
done?
you folks have like if you go to my social media posts, even everything, I'm so exhausted by government and like political system. I always been like there will be no one particular post you will be saying like I'm praising Awami League or Bangabandhu or whatever that is. Okay, I was always been very exhausted by the political system of Bangladesh. Yes, there are a lot of time I have to think about my own security. There are like maybe some of the stuff I'm saying, I have to say it in a different way. But it doesn't mean that like I'm just like outright praising and like being in these spaces. I have seen a lot of colleagues of mine. They have changed their own criteria right now. They're saying like, oh, anti, but they used to like to go to those like meetings. They used to like to, even though I never ever sat down with policymakers or like ministry type of people, because I have no interest with them, because like submitting yourself to like a political like figures like them, I would rather die. Sorry, I know
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
The thing is that our politics is always against the establishment, right?
absolutely, yeah,
Because the
absolutely.
establishment is, so whichever party is in power, we
Yeah.
will critique and question the party, because none of these bourgeois parties are what we need or what we want.
Yeah, and
So
I kind of thought like I would like rather to like to have a conversation with this whole like so-called like interim government as well. Now if you give me 1 crore, I will not sit down because I have no interest of it then, because they had chance to like to kind of do something and make some changes, but they also kind of like prove themselves that like they're also like whenever they kind of like ক্ষমতার গন্ধ পেলেই হচ্ছে তারা যা ইচ্ছা তাই করবে আর কি, তাই তো? More likely that. Sorry for the
and they're
rant. Your
listening to,
feminist oral history.
they're listening to not us, to some other sets of people, pressure
Oh,
groups, so to
oh,
speak. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I just like yeah. Then again, thank you so much
Anyway,
for.
so in terms of burnout, I don't navigate it well, but I have tried over. So in October, I had a crash. Like I was actually in bed like for 2 weeks, when I was like, there is no point. And do I leave? Do I want to leave? How do I go on? And so on. But now I think slowly it's become a bit better. One, I think I've given myself the break in terms of thinking like, listen, you can't really change the world. So like take a deep breath, it's fine. That's one. Two is to actually, again, I think build community. I think is to foster friendships, is to really counter hate with love. I know it sounds very cheesy, but I now believe in the politics of love. I think we all need to be a little bit nicer to each other, talk to each other, learn to listen to each other, because I think we're always talking all the time and never really listening to anyone else. So I really think that it's really about like, it's about creating this sense of togetherness, is to share each other's stories, is to find points of convergence, to build movements. Yeah, try and find hope where hope does not exist.
Thank you. We are sort of like end of our discussion, so I have 2 more questions for you.
2 more at the end.
Yeah, 2 more. So, as someone who has shaped conversations, movements, and narratives, what do you hope the next generation of feminist storytellers and organizers carry forward?
I think I hope that the next generation just tells their own stories. I think my generation tried to appease a lot of people. We tried to work within the system, and I think the next generation I hope the next generation is a bit braver and just goes ahead and tells their stories. So that's one. But I think the young generation also needs to be a bit more cognizant. Sometimes I feel like they get lost in the current moment without taking into consideration the context, the history. I think it's really important for us to also understand where we are, how we came to this moment, if we are to imagine another possibility of being, of resistance. So I think I would say the young generation needs to actually read up on what has happened, how the feminist movement, the labor movements of the past, the leftist movements, how did we get here, and how do we get out of this, is one thing. And beyond, I think now, because digital media has given us, it's in a way, it's a very hateful space, but it can also be democratizing. So I think the young people need to figure out how we can publish our own stories, how we can create digital platforms, how we can actually take up space on the digital sphere. I think I've been really talking about the creation of feminist bots. I think we should have, I would like to call them clit bots. I think we should have feminist bots that are spreading messages of love and feminism, as opposed to the hate that the other bots are spreading. Yeah.
Thank you. And then what keeps you grounded in this work?
What keeps me grounded in this work? I don't know. I guess the people. I guess the people that I've met, the people I've worked with, the people whose struggles I've seen, people who've lost, people who've lost their family members or their co-workers in factory fires, in in those kind of places. All the women who undergo violence on an everyday basis. Like you see them, you can't unsee them. You can't like tune them out from your head. So I think in the end, that's what keeps me grounded, I suppose. I don't know.
You're like zoned out. Okay, no worries. My last question is for you. Is that finally, is there a story, personal or political, that you return to when you need to remember why you do what you do?
Yeah, as I was saying, it'll sound very repetitive because it's the same thing. But there is a story that I really, really like. I've written about it before, but it's called I think the story is called "The Ones Who Walk Away" by Ursula Le Guin. I really like her. But the story is essentially about how the happiness of the people of that place rests on one child being stuck in a broom for her whole life, right? So the thing is, if you can ignore that child that is stuck in that broom closet, you are happy. And most oftentimes we are like that. We are going on with our lives, sort of like tuning out all of the injustices and oppression that are happening around the world. So I like to come back to that. Like, I want to be one of those citizens who was tuning out the voice of the crying child, or do I not? And these days, particularly with like what's happening in Palestine and us like going through our feeds and just like, tuning out all of that injustice just so that we can survive in the world to go on. I feel deeply troubled by it. I feel deeply troubled by humanity in itself. I deeply feel troubled by my own humanity that I can, just go on living. But I guess we must
You must
go on.
go on, right? Yes. Sushmita Preetha, thank you for such a thoughtful and generous conversation. Your work across journalism, research, and grassroots organizing has shaped Bangladesh's feminist and social justice landscapes in enduring ways. As part of Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project, your voice will serve as a resource and a guide for future generations working toward justice, accountability, and collective liberation. So thank you so much, everyone who joined us for this episode. Please subscribe to the Bangladesh Feminist Archives YouTube channel and stay updated on future conversations. Before we say you bye-bye, do you want to say something? Any last words to us?
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much, Jonoy. And first of all, you've been very patient with me. I have, like we know the inside story, but I'm very, very grateful, and you've been very kind and very generous and very helpful. But also, I really want to thank Bangladesh Feminist Archives for the incredible work it's doing, and I'd love to be a part of it in any way I can. So thank you
Oh,
so
thank you
much.
so much. You are, in a way, you
I
are
am, I
part of.
am. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no
so
worries.
yeah.
Again,
Thank
Shikmita Preetha, thank you so much again, and thank you all for being part of this journey. Thank you so much.